Hello, and welcome to my 3.25 Venom Gyre update. This video will discuss the buffs and nerfs to Venom Gyre for the upcoming PoE League, Settlers of Kalguur 3.25. It will contain a recap in TLDR for those who don't want to watch the beginning part of the video, although I encourage you to watch it as it provides a lot of information and takes you through my thought process of why I think the way I do for the build. And I will also give a brief discussion of the league starter rankings in terms of where this build stands compared to other league starters and why you should or should not start Venom Gyre. Lastly, I'd like to remind everyone that the 3.24 build video is about 99% viable and accurate, barring a few gem changes and a few gearing changes. There is really nothing different for this league. The build is largely the same and it is mostly fine. Let's begin. So we're first going to discuss the buffs and changes. Speaking of the nerfs, we've lost some Tailwind effect, and we have lost the Ancestral Protector, which gave us attack speed, as well as the Fizz taken as changes, which GG has removed that mod throughout many places. In terms of buffs, we've had some claw changes, especially the Imperial Claw, which is the main claw that we use. There are some changes to the tree, some changes in leveling, which are all positive, as well as some aura changes, which will result in a more deeper discussion. So in terms of Tailwind nerfs, we are seeing a negative 4% action speed, as the Gale Force effect has reduced from 15% to 10% for each action speed change. The math is on the screen, as you guys can see, and for some reason this doesn't result in any DPS loss. I've tested this in PoB and during its beta phase, and it does not calculate any DPS loss. So this may be subject to change if PoB updates or if the calculations change in PoB, but realistically, if there's any loss, it will probably be very negligible and you probably won't even feel it. So the removal of Ancestral Protector, which used to give us a 20% more attack speed modifier, is a straight up pure negative 20% DPS loss. It is one less button to press while we're mapping or while we're bossing, but there's not much we can do in terms of this. Because Venom Gyre is not considered a melee skill, it did not benefit from any of the numerical changes that other melee gems got. So to alleviate this, we will definitely need a better claw with a higher attack speed modifier. In this patch, or this upcoming patch, GGG has decided to remove many of the modifiers that are found, which enables us to take physical damage as any elemental damage. In particular, the three changes that affects us is the Taste of Hate changes and the Corel and Gravicia's Betrayal prefix crafts. This results in a net loss of negative 32% physical max hit. And there's unfortunately not much we can do about this. Some of the ways to mitigate this are hopefully better strength and dex bases, which result in us having more overall armor. But we do not scale this armor with determination or any sort of increased effect. So the recovery or the ability to make up the loss of physical max hit is diminished. On Lethal Pride, we can gain endurance charge on kill. And at max endurance charges, we can have 12% physical mitigation. However, this does not cover the 32%. And alternatively, we can wear Lightning Coil, which is a decent chest piece, but it's a unique item that is likely very expensive in League Start and will result in us losing a bunch of stats on our chest piece for essentially slightly more defense. Whether you think this is good for the build or not is completely up to you. You should plug in Lightning Coil in your own Venom Gyre PoB and figure out if it's worth it. If you were to ask me, I think scaling damage is far more important than Lightning Coil, so I probably will not wear one. So we do know that one of the new chess piece Eldritch Implicits will have a Fizz taken as, And if it were to follow the way Eldritch Implicits work for the helmet, it is likely a Eater Ichor. However, at the current moment, we do not know what color this mod is. It could be red or blue. So if it's an Exarch Ichor, we would lose 21% crit multi for this Fizz Taken Ass, and if it's a Eater Implicit, we would lose a Grace Aura effect. If it is an Eater Implicit, this is really, really good, as we would rather have more Fizz Taken Ass than Grace Aura effect. Especially after Grace has been nerfed, so it is even better to do so. However, if it is an Exarch effect or an Exarch Implicit, I am not exactly sure if it's worth it over the 21 crit multi. But again, that's something that you would have to decide for your own build. Now let's go to the buffs. So GGG has increased the base crit rate of Imperial Claws by exactly 1%. This is a very big deal, as the base crit is the most important stat for any crit build, outside of crit multi, of course. But the crit base stat of your weapon is a very, very important stat for attack based builds. And this build, as you can see, results in a 12.8% DPS gain. And the calculations are shown on screen in POB, where we have a 11.65% more crit chance. And again, like I said, a 12.8% overall DPS gain. In terms of leveling and in a league start scenario, this will make it much easier to swap to crit, as we will just have more crit from lesser sources from crit, because our base crit is better. And at the higher end, it's a lot easier to cap our crit rate against single target bosses through Brittle, which can be found on the implicits of our boots. As when we're using whirling blades on top of bosses, we will be dropping Brittle Ground, so the bosses will be brittle. So in some of the tree changes that we've seen is particularly seen in the bottom portion of the tree in near the keystone point blank. In particular, the wheel called Cornered Prey, which we can fully max out along with this mastery for 4 points, opposed to Dazzling Strikes, which used to be 5 points. Overall, this is a 8.7% DPS gain. The acronym PEV stands for Point Efficiency Value, and I'm calculating this in DPS. We can do this by dividing the DPS gain by the amount of points it takes, because for each point that we're sacrificing or we want to increase our damage in this for damage in the best way possible. So as we can see, the Cornered Prey points are about 2 times more valuable than Dazzling Strikes. We do lose some EHP as mobs will no longer be blinded, but EHP is not as valuable as a stat as max hit, and the amount of EHP we lose is extremely negligible. It's about 4%. Additionally, we can mitigate further EHP loss by using the free point that we gain and clicking the mastery for prevent 3% spell damage. This would give us a 2.1% gain in EHP and an increase in max hit, which is far more important than EHP. So in reality, we would only lose about 2% EHP for going to Cornered Prey. As discussed previously and as mentioned earlier, the melee changes are extremely good for both endgame and early game scaling. In particular, for us, the melee changes affect our leveling. Because Venom Gyre is a very bad skill to level it with, we will use Spectral Helix or Frostblades. On the screen are some of the links that you should use while leveling. Of course, this is up to 4 gems, as I assume you don't have more than 4 gems during the campaign. And in my POB, there are also trees for both Frostblades and Spectral Helix, whatever you decide. The trees are similar, but there are some minor alterations. I would probably recommend you to level with Frostblades this time around, but Spectral Helix is also very, very, very good. Additionally, quality changes in terms of for weapons are also very beneficial for us, and the whetstone changes, which instantly allow a weapon to go up to about 20% quality when they at lower levels. This change will make leveling far easier. Alternatively, we do know that respecking is quote unquote free this league with gold, and they do not, and you can respec without paying the regret orb price. So you can also level with Rain of Arrows, and then respec your entire tree over to Venom Gyre once you have a good enough claw, either at the end of the campaign or during white maps. The POB will not have a Rain of Arrows tree, as I prefer to level with similar weapons during the campaign, um, rather than doing a large weapon swap like going from bows to claws. However, if you wish to level with Rain of Arrows, you can, and there are lots of resources on YouTube for you to follow, and you can always respec back to my Venom Gyre tree if you wish. So some of the aura changes I wish to talk about is in particular one aura, and that is Flesh and Stone. And to run Flesh and Stone, we would need to drop Wrath, and this would enable us to also run Herald of Thunder. So Wrath is a 19% DPS increase for our build, and Flesh and Stone does not increase our damage, but would enable us to be more defensive. All the math is seen here, assuming that you both run Herald of Thunder and Flesh and Stone instead of Wrath. So why are we fitting in Flesh and Stone with Herald of Thunder instead of Wrath, even though Wrath is more DPS? The reason for that is because the grace changes greatly affect us early on, when defense is not as strong, and lower level base types did not get a defense buff. So the grace changes purely hurt the early game. They disproportionately hurt the early game more than they do the end game. Because in the end game, we do know that there are better base types to alleviate the grace changes. But early on, the grace changes hurt more disproportionately. And one of the strongest ways to get power in the early game is to simply level. So throughout the early white and yellow maps, it is really important to not die and to level up as we go. And that's the reason why I decided to gear this build more defensively by fitting in Flesh and Stone and Herald of Thunder. By doing so, we would lose about 13% of our damage, but instead gain an 11% increase in all our max hit. In the end game, we can drop Herald of Thunder for Wrath, and the reason we can do this is with the Enlightened Gem. However, the Enlightened Gem is very rare in SSF and could be expensive on trade. I'm not really sure the price, and I won't give you a price, but it could be expensive. So I won't consider the gem to be easily obtainable, and that's the reason why I have not decided to put it in my build. However, in the POB, you can see that it is in the build, but it's unticked. You can always alternatively just run Wrath and not use Flesh and Stone and Herald of Thunder. And the reason for doing so is just to get more damage out. Some of the caveats I would like to discuss is that the Tailwind changes may be an actual DPS loss, but again, this is more on the POB side. I'm not really sure how to calculate action speed, so this is just me saying that I do not know. But in my opinion, I don't think if there is any DPS loss, it is very major. It's probably extremely negligible, probably less than 0.5%. But that's just me spitballing a number. DPS and defense are both calculated using the cluster gear and tree. So your percentages may vary, although it should be within an acceptable margin. Fizzmax hit will lower EHP. I'm not calculating this because I don't really care much about EHP because max hit is usually the more important stat. And the Grace nerf is not calculated for the end game, and the reason why is because I assume that the better base types will even out the Grace nerfs. Of course, I may also be proven wrong, and we may see an actual lower EHP number than in POB, but that's just unfortunately something we're going to have to deal with late game. This is an assumption I made, so It might be wrong, it might be correct. I'll leave that up to you to decide. But again, as I said, the Grace nerfs will hurt disproportionately more in the early game. So some of the new gem links that we've got, and the reason why we've done new gem link is because we've lost Ancestral Protector. So this opens up a new 4-link using automation support, and this is reflected in the POB. And this will allow us to run a guard skill with increased duration support, to have Steel Skin as a initial buffer of damage before any actual hits do damage to our HP pool. This will greatly increase our defense, and I think it's just less buttons to press. It's just much easier. There are also new life rolls on rare stats, and because our build is mostly rare items, there is an argument that we could have a higher EHP value or a higher max hit value because we just have more life overall. But I simply do not know the life rolls. So this is a potential buff defensively. But if you look at the overall defensive changes, such as the Grace nerfs and Flesh and Stone and all that, I'm leaning that our build will probably be better in the end game than early game. So if you were to talk about user experience, it's probably a net neutral because the early game is going to suck and the late game is going to be a lot better. So I'm not entirely sure how this would change the user experience or anything, but I think it's a net neutral. In the end game, though, I do think this is a buff. There are new weapon enchants with the new league. I'm not sure how they work with Venom Gyre. There is not anything I'm looking forward to because I won't be playing this build, I think. I haven't decided yet. But there might be some new keystone that works with Venom Gyre. I will have to take a look at the list when the league comes out, but at the current moment, I just do not know. Recombinators are back, so that probably means easier and better tri-elemental claws. Play around with recombinators and try to get a really good claw. Okay, welcome to the recap and summary. Although this is one long discussion video, I'm just going to put this section separate for people who wish to skip ahead. We have lost 11.5% DPS, although if you wish to run the old auras, which are Grace, Wrath, and Precision, you will gain damage because of the claw changes. The sources of DPS gain and loss are below. For defense, we have lost 21% of our physical max hit. However, we on average have gained 11% from Flesh and Stone. Technically, it's 22, but because the way Flesh and Stone works, I'm just going to take the average of 22, which is 11%. Below are the sources of why we have gained or lost defense. Alright, so let's discuss how good the League Starter is compared to other builds. In my opinion, I think Venom Gyre is an A- to B+ tier starter. And it seems that Tai Killer, one of the best players in PoE, also agree, as it is ranked 16th on his list. There are lots of league starters that are better than it, but there are also many league starters which are not as good as it. So it is probably a solid A- to B+ tier. And I'm not going to say Tai Killer is right. I'm not going to say I am right. But it seems that my thinking largely agrees with one of the best players in the game. If I were you, I'd probably trust Tai Killer's tier list over my words, but I'm just going to use that as evidence to reinforce my point. So some of the reasons you should league start Venom Gyre is it's a safe and proven league starter. Venom Gyre has been around for a while. It was good last league. It was also good the league before. And because of the minuscule changes to the build this league, it is very, very unlikely that this build is not a good league starter. It is a proven and safe league starter. It also shares Gyre and the passive tree with the new flavor of the month, the Warden Strike archetype, such as Lightning Strike. Lightning Strike Warden seems to be the premier starter this league and will probably be one of the most played starter this league. Remember that respecking is free with gold, so it's a lot easier. If you do not like Venom Gyre, you can always just take the Venom Gyre gem out of your 6th link and slot in Lightning Strike and reroll your Ascendancy, and voila, you have the Lightning Strike Warden. Every single thing about Venom Gyre almost follows Warden Lightning Strike. So there are lots of options for you to swap to and try. There's also lots of scaling and endgame options for Venom Gyre. We have recently lost the strength stacking, but that is mostly for the Berserker. Deck stacking, accuracy stacking, and Omni are generally fine. And Venom Gyre as a league starter is one of the best clearing league starters in the game. I do not know how good it is compared to Lightning Strike Warden, but it's something that you can experiment with and you can try out. If you were to ask me which is better, I still believe that Venom Gyre has better clear than Lightning Strike, mostly because of how quick Deadeye is. However, Warden does provide a lot of damage, so throughout the mid and towards the end game, it is very likely that Warden Lightning Strike, especially Lightning Strike of Arcing, will probably be better clear than Venom Gyre. One thing that is not debatable, however, is Venom Gyre has better single target. That's simply because of its shotgun mechanic. There is no way that Lightning Strike Warden will have better single target unless Warden comes out to be an overwhelmingly strong ascendancy. It seems to me that currently the numbers favor Warden simply because she just provides so much damage. So she's just better in both clear and single target, but we just do not know because it's a new ascendancy. However, this doesn't change the fact that Venom Gyre is still an insanely clearing league starter. Some of the reasons to not start Venom Gyre is that it's not an S tier starter. You can always, if you're worried that your league starter may be bricked because of a subpar or suboptimal league starter, you can choose not to league start this, and that's completely up to you. Or you want to try something new. The new slam skills, the new melee skills, gladiator, retaliation skills, block, and the new warden are all great things to try. So if that's a reason, then why not? And lastly, it's your league start. I'm not going to tell you how to play your game. And if you wish to not league start Venom Gyre, then so be it. I really hope that you found this video stimulating and useful while you try to decide your league starter. And I hope you have a wonderful 3.25 Settlers of Kalguur.